The internet created a system in which information is exchanged quickly and almost instantaneously, and there's so much information out there that it became a market. And so what that did was TikTok, right? How do I find out about something new and finding a new different kind of space or place to kind of buy something, right? What it has really done is opened up this space. So economics, in my perspective, is the study of decision making. That decision making can happen on an individual level, what we do, what we buy at the grocery store, whether we decide to get up in the morning or not and go to work, all the way to what are institutions, organizations, and governments doing to make decisions about everyday things. And so when we think about economics, it really is that the science of decision making.
Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to its member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer here at the AAVMC. Today, we are discussing the economy, capital E, and its intersections with diversity. Now, these two issues are super hot topics right now, as everybody can imagine. And lots of folks know that these two topics are tightly wound together, but there often isn't much discourse on exactly how what the economy tells us about diversity and what diversity can tell us about the economy. And also, little known fact for folks that economics, is a social science. Woo, 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 woo. So there are just a few of us social science folks that just kind of like to hang around vet med, but I always like to remind folks that there are a bunch of numbers folks hanging around that aren't on the STEM side. So anyway, I'm hoping that my guest today can help shed some light on the relationship between the economy and diversity. And so I am delighted to welcome economist Dr. Clint Neill back to the show. Welcome back, Clint.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. It's always great to be on this podcast.
Always great to have you. Thanks so much for agreeing. So for our viewers and listeners, Clint, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Clint Neill, I'm an economist, not a veterinarian, and again, in the social science realm of things. So, I love working with my hard scientists and learning all of the things about biology and disease and everything we can talk about there. But my background is in agricultural economics in particular. I'm currently the CEO and managing partner for Applied Economics Consulting, but still do quite a bit of research through Cornell's College of Veterinary Medicine through their Center for Veterinary Business and Entrepreneurship. And I have been everywhere. Lisa, you know me. I've been with you for a while since I was a grad student, through my role at Virginia Tech, through Cornell, and even my brief time at AAVMA. So now I just do consulting and try to help everybody with data, analytics, education content, and trying to bring economics into the wider field of veterinary medicine.
Fantastic. Yeah, Clint and I kind of go way back. It's always great to kind of chit chat a bit about what's going on. So I want to do a little bit of level setting first. Everybody likes to know what we collectively mean when we're like, it's the economy, stupid. Remember that quote. So what exactly is economics and the economy?
Yeah. So if you look up the definition of economics, you can probably find 10 different definitions. I'll define it my way and how I kind of view it, and then how that plays into the economy, quote unquote. So economics, in my perspective, is the study of decision making. That decision making can happen on an individual level, what we do, what we buy at the grocery store, whether we decide to get up in the morning or not and go to work, all the way to what are institutions, organizations, and governments doing to make decisions about everyday things. And so when we think about economics, it really is that the science of decision making. when we go into the economy is basically how we visualize and think about how all of those decisions are being happening and affecting everyday lives in terms of markets and how we interact with each other, different economic agents, as we say it, consumers, businesses, organizations, governments, and kind of using that as kind of that aggregate accumulation of all those decisions happening all at once.
So really easy to understand.
Yeah, I mean, we've got microeconomists, macroeconomists, all institutional economists. There's a lot to economics, but that's kind of a try to condense it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there are lots of different types of economics. They're all related. They all kind of use some of some of the same tools, but different things look at decision making differently. So, for example, I am absolutely not an economist. However, I am very, very interested in behavioral economics and kind of helping people understand that kind of decision making. So, for some of you folks out there that are watching or listening may recall those pre-pandemic years which seemed like 20 years ago, but they were really not that far long ago, when we were kind of all talking about the need for greater financial literacy. And it's and so and what does it mean to be financially literate? And yes, does the data show that generally most people have low levels of financial literacy? I kind of probably take a little bit of umbrage with that. People understand that it's money in, money out, and that there are these tools. But what behavioral economics particularly looks at is how do people feel about money, and how does that drive their decision making, and how confident or not confident do they feel about certain aspects of their own economic input, their the ways in which they kind of translate some of these things. It's kind of like when I tell people the core for behavioral economics for me is, do I know what it would take for me, Dr. Greenhill, a 52-year-old middle-aged Black lady, to look like Beyonce? Yes, I do. Am I willing to engage in the behaviors
Correct.
what makes me look like Beyonce at this age? No, I'm not.
Yeah, and that's the fun thing about behavioral economics, which is kind of actually one of my big areas what I went to school for and went to grad school for. But it's sort of this idea that we all have different preferences, we have different beliefs, we have different backgrounds that all inform our choices and our decisions. And behavioral economics really wants to make sure that we account for that as best we can. It's hard because everybody's different. So how do we tackle those problems? It's fun, and it keeps my job interesting.
There you go. It keeps the job interesting. And it is. And there's definitely some really unique things about vet med. Like, we participated in a study, AAVMC participated and requisitioned a study with AVMA on, veterinary students and their kind of reactions and to sick animals, the kind of ASPCA commercials, and kind of what kinds of things did that study predict in terms of how they think about money. Basically, veterinary students see sick animals and they're like, please take all of my money.
Yeah.
All of it. Just take all of my money.
Yeah, and I got to be a part of that study, and I think Dr. Bridget Bain was the lead on that, and I was kind of on the back end of helping with that, and it was great to see that it was like, hey, people. It also said a lot about people who choose to go into vet med, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, the people who really care about animals are clearly going to pick a career that is all about animals, but there's all these other aspects. How do we help them be successful?
Right. When they're so vulnerable to like literally just saying, please take my money because Fluffy needs a new leg. Right. And so bringing it back to our topic today, what does this study then of, decision making and the economy writ large have to do with diversity?
For me, and again, I'll say this is sort of my opinion, there is some research around this as well. Diversity in all aspects of diversity. So I'm going to talk really big about diversity here. really is about bringing those different perspectives and bringing a whole new, you know, diversity to the economy itself. When we have different experiences, how you grew up, Lisa,
Yeah.
versus me, we're going to think about a problem completely differently. It's going to create different solutions, products, services, how we go about our daily lives and the products we choose, as well as if we wanted to start a business, how we can do that and create those things. It really creates an economy that functions very similarly to how we think about ecology, right? When you have a really biodiverse, habitat or system, you're going to be able to see a lot more robust resiliency within that kind of habitat. Same thing for the economy. Diversity plays a role in creating all of these different products, services, how people buy things, what they react to, and really creates a much more robust economy down the long run.
Right, right. So, some things that we will see kind of just reading the paper, like, hey, this community represents spending power of $2 billion, right? Like, not very Austin Powers moment, right? What does that mean in lay terms?
Yeah, what it means is that that community, no matter what it looks like or whatever we're talking about in the space, is really saying that collectively they have very similar backgrounds or decision making motivations. And
Mhm.
so that then says, hey, we can then take that and say, well, these people are going to act similarly. There's still a lot of differences within that. But when we talk about group spending and all those things, I was thinking about this millennial versus Gen X versus Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about that in vet med, how we actually look at that and say collectively they're acting very similarly on the average. Still distribution, still a lot of differences, but this is a majority or at least an average of what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. So how do we use econ, as I used to call my macro micro classes back in undergrad, way, way back. But how do we use, this work to learn about social issues, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've written a lot of articles kind of alluding to this, as you
Yeah.
probably know about. A lot of it is just about understanding that there is value, and we tend to put that value to monetary value more so to like get rid of trying to talk about apples versus oranges, right? We say, okay, well, it's all about value. That value that we can bring to better understanding those social issues is really important. And the economics and the way we study those decisions that get made around social issues really helps kind of level that playing field. So we're not talking about apples versus oranges when we talk about, hey, we want to help, those less fortunate with buying food, right? Affording basic necessities. When we talk about that social issue, it can get very politically charged, very
Sure.
much about motivations. But what we can say is, hey, if we support those people, guess what? The economy is going to do better, right? They're going to be more productive. They're going to be able to contribute to the economy. They're going to help circulate those, dollars and funds elsewhere. And so when we talk about social issues, economics provides kind of that level playing field, at least in my mind. People can disagree with me all they want, and they do. But the idea here is economics is trying to provide something that we can compare these different issues, we can compare these different ways of how things move, and then also talk about that circular idea of how things circulate and move within society.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that this is, I think, one of the reasons why I, as a DEI researcher and social scientist, really kind of, again, econ was not my ministry, but it is so tightly related to the types of things that I'm interested in studying, right? And so kind of thinking about, well, if you think about just kind of the general Maslow's hierarchy, right? If you don't have those basic foundational needs met, there's going to be low productivity, and there's not going to be kind of what, especially in a capitalistic society, we would say is an input into the economy, right? Like they would be considered a drain potentially, a drain, or just kind of again, language is important, so just help me muddle through. but it is one of those kind of things where, okay, you can get to certain levels of productivity as you move up the hierarchy, right? And that those things kind of go back into the economy. If you have money, then you can go to the store and buy $20 eggs, for example.
Yeah. But the other way to think about this, same thing about Maslow's hierarchy is, especially when we think about psychological needs, getting
Yeah.
into being able just to say, okay, I don't need to worry about my food, where that's coming from or affording that. I can go on a vacation. I can take time for myself. I can
Yeah.
reset and not get burned out, right? You're meeting those higher level of needs,
Yeah.
which I think is really important as we kind of think about, hey, if we just think about these social issues, how do we help people reach a level of sanity in some cases, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is important.
Yeah. 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 So what are some of the trends that you're currently seeing? And I'll say, for everybody watching and listening, we're recording this in early February, 2025. A lot is going on. We're not going to talk about all of that today, but a lot is going on. But what kinds of trends do you see, or you know, dare you project related to diversity kind of in this moment? What do you see out in the hinterlands?
Yeah, I have to start with, that's a loaded question.
Right? We will not hold you to everything that you
Yeah.
say on this podcast.
Let me
Disclaimer.
let me look into the crystal ball here a little bit more. I think there's a lot in this space though that says trends, especially around diversity in the economy, kind of what is important is where we're trying to figure out, and how do we utilize that diversity in different production methods? How do we think about it in the economy to move it forward? We know that a lot of having a robust economy is having this diversity of people, of thoughts, of backgrounds, and making sure that that continues forward. I'm interested to see, I'll leave it at this. I'm interested to see what happens as we go forward, because it will have very direct impacts and we'll continue to kind of be in this space. I think the one major trend that I'm looking for though, and kind of watching, is how this, no matter what happens in the
Yeah.
with the current political situation, is how this affects entrepreneurship in particular, given, you know, all the changes in federal jobs, how that has worked with higher education and institutions, and where are people going to go. And that's, I was reading an article the other day, it said all these people have an opportunity to be consultants, to basically be entrepreneurs. And I think I'm interested to really watch that as it goes, because I've seen a lot more of that kind of with the gig economy and everything else going on before all of this, especially blowing up since COVID. How does that kind of continue as things continue to change and we get farther away from COVID too? Because that was sort of where my thoughts have been anyways.
Yeah. So I do want to ask a little more pointed question about kind of what about the ag space and kind of ag slash, because they are not the same, but they're related, like rural, right? So let me set it up for you. So, obviously we know that there is a dire need in rural communities for veterinary services, right? And I can tell you that I get probably, I don't know, half dozen questions every week sliding into the inbox about we need to do more recruitment of, rural students. I'm going to address each of these before, like, here's a partial monologue, but we need more of these students, but we that are interested, from rural communities, and students who are interested in practicing in rural communities to kind of alleviate the shortage. And then, we pivot and say, okay, well, how do we retain them in these communities, because they get there and they don't stay very long. And, our deans just recently met, and we talked. It was a good discussion, but it felt still like we skippity doo past all of the social issues associated with rural communities that make the economic decision making what it is, right? And so I've been arguing for a few years is that based on the number of available kind of students in these communities, we're pretty much tapped out maxed out at our recruiting capabilities in these communities, recognizing that not everybody's going to want to grow up to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
There are other careers, right? But also that because these communities have some really serious social issues, like they have higher levels of poverty, they have higher levels of in some areas per capita, maybe substance issues. There is the digital divide. It doesn't exist in a city, it exists out there. There's lower access to, healthcare and all of these other things. And so families are like, Clint, get that degree and go. Don't come back, right? Don't come back. And so that students are getting some of that messaging, and then they're also getting messaging about how hard it is, right? And so when we think about the study of decision making, these are front end things, and then the back end things are, oh, I'm here, and those things are true. Yeah.
I want to start off with saying that the rural topic has been a passion of mine. That's most of my research at Cornell. I have a whole USDA grant about it and continuing down that lane. But one of the big groups that I do work with now is Farm Journal Foundation, which I think I've chatted with you about because we had the same conversation probably 3 years ago, which is we've created we've done a lot of work on a lot of different things, both on policy advocacy on the federal level. We're working with state legislators to kind of address this problem more locally. And then we also have an education arm where we have created free online modules for everybody that kind of starts talking about these issues early on, but also tries to paint it in a more positive light, right? Like there's a lot of good things in rural and large animal medicine. And so this issue has really been a hot topic for me for a while. And I think that you're right, though. I've had a number of conversations with deans that says you're not going to get any more people from those areas. And every time I look at this problem, I say there's structural problems around just the community readiness to have a veterinarian in that space. Are they ready to support somebody? Do you have the resources to tell them where to go for healthcare? I grew up in a small town that didn't have a hospital. There was a hospital 20 minutes away. Nobody wanted to go there.
Yeah, right.
And so these types of issues we really try to talk about a lot more, but the research behind this is not there yet to say these are the issues, this is what we're doing, all of that. I've interviewed a lot of people, done a lot of qualitative work, and we've written case studies that are in those modules, and I'll give you the link to post. Most of the people I interviewed didn't come from a rural background. I have one that came from Brooklyn, New York. I have somebody who came from Detroit, Michigan, and they're working with chickens, they're working with cows, they're working with all of that out in rural spaces, and have found a love and a passion for it and want to help others find that. And it's there, but it's trying to change that narrative has been very difficult. But again, also hasn't really been supported from a policy legislator side, other than providing financial support at the end of the day. After you've gotten through all of this, sure, we'll help you pay some loans, but it's about developing that kind of passion and awareness, and what is that look like? What does all of this look like earlier on? So the modules we do are from high school all the way through early career to try to both help with the recruitment across everybody as well as the retention side.
Yeah, and just so folks know, I love rural communities. I am one generation removed from a farm. So I'm not just slamming rural communities. I know what I'm talking about, because the community my mom grew up in, there's still folks that have to put a light in the window for the ambulance, right? And so, I know that I spend a lot of time in these communities, in that community in Central Virginia. And so I know, we see, and this is, I think, where it's really important when we talk about research and the need for interdisciplinary research, because you're studying the things you're studying. For me, I'm looking at let's look at that messaging. And we love rural communities, right? And we talk about how bucolic they are, rolling hills, Look at the farm. The sheep.
It's where everybody moved during COVID.
Right. You go buy a big house and a farmhouse and it's got the swing and the whole bit, but that narrative doesn't ever get below that to kind of peel back the layers. And you find that, frankly, the things that we're dealing with in urban areas are the same things that we're dealing with in rural areas. There's just more space to cover.
Yep.
Right? Your neighbor is a mile or two away. That's really the big difference, right? And so, they're not that much different. And yet, for me, when I look at these kinds of issues, I'm pulling from your work. I'm pulling from a lot of different, other different kinds of social sciences as well, where I'm like, look, this is the picture of what it all looks like when you peel back the layer. In the city, we're just kind of grimy, and you just see it when you drive by.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think that there's I think that there's a real challenge for the profession, without kind of having some of that more tangible data that our STEM colleagues really embrace. I'm saying this
Yeah.
very kindly, right? To kind of understand that just trying the same things harder that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
also a
and
saying about that.
yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, the more we work, especially on the state level side, we've worked with 3 different states already. What we find is, we're like, hey, what data do you have? And they give us this data, and we're like, you're asking questions that you don't have data for yet. And so a lot of what we have been working on is really recommending start collecting this data to better address these rural communities. What are they looking for? What support do they need? And how can we better create a system that supports those rural veterinarians, especially?
So, Clint, you mentioned the pandemic.
Darn it.
And what a wild and crazy ride that was. But, it was really interesting to kind of see how things economically changed, not just here, but globally, as everybody's kind of now, folks developed all kinds of side hustles. Folks were selling stuff, like we saw the rise of things like Shein and Temu, where we were just sitting around, and it was like, those oven mitts are only 32 cents. So
Yeah.
buy those. Right.
Yeah.
But we also saw things like TikTok, and certainly we know that there's like new stuff constantly emerging, and you can buy stuff through Meta, you can buy stuff everywhere, and I am not encouraging this, vet students, but I do not frequent the site, just to be clear, but I saw it on a different social media site, like, feed pics.
Yeah. I'm glad you said it. I didn't have to go there.
It's like apparently a big thing that people have written books about how easy it is to sell feet pics and earn thousands of dollars each month. But there's all these kinds of ways of plugging into these economic systems and making money, right? And so, they've also really been interesting in the ways in which these online apps and such have made it possible for folks who have not been necessarily successful, in traditional entrepreneur routes, because of the need for greater capital, startup capital, have been able to kind of enter the space and do well. Like, I'm off of TikTok, but now I got to probably get back on it because there's a lip gloss that I cannot find anywhere else.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk about a little bit about how the online markets have really kind of changed the landscape for even entrepreneurialism.
Yeah. And I think all of that, to even take a slight step back from that, because it influences it, the internet created a system in which information is exchanged quickly and almost instantaneously. And there's so much information out there that it became a market. And so what that did was TikTok, right? How do I find out about something new, and finding a new different kind of space or place to kind of buy something, right? Or where can I go get this private jet for my pet, right? To
Yeah.
fly me across the country.
Right.
All of Yeah, I saw those. I'm like,
saw
that
those.
sounds interesting, but it's a little expensive.
A little too expensive.
Yeah. But what it has really done is opened up this space of you don't need any capital. Honestly, I'll tell you my trick that I did. I got on Canva, free account, got to create a bunch of stickers through their free stuff, put it on a shop page that doesn't charge me anything to start it. They just take their fee, and guess what? I didn't need any capital, I needed time.
Yeah.
And so it really created this space when we think about working, whether that's working for somebody else or being an entrepreneur, it really is about your time and how much time do you want to put into working versus leisure. That's the trade-off in labor economics. And then really understanding that there are so many resources now to do it. You don't need anything to start a TikTok and monetize it. It's all free, right? It's your time. It does depend on how much you value your time, which I always remind people.
Right.
But it has created a space that's you can exchange information, you can get paid for that, and it's not about having this, I need to create a product, I need to have a lawn mowing business, but I have to have all this equipment. It's a different space than it was 10 years ago when I was going, through grad school. It's now about how do we connect people to things that they want? How do we help facilitate that problem, especially with the internet and the amount of information? And we all have our favorite influencers, right? I'm sure I've got a few mostly around cooking and baking. But that idea of how do we filter and do all of that, and this gig economy has just completely changed. It's not even full-time entrepreneurship for a lot of people, it's part-time entrepreneurship. It's that side gig. It's how do I facilitate doing the things I want to do and having the money to do what I want instead of working 9 to 5 and being stuck in whatever career trajectory I chose 20 years ago.
I mean, it is kind of feels like the Wild Wild West a bit because there's so much information to sift through, and then there's these algorithms that are like, hey, do you like this? Like, and I tell people I'm a single lady, I'm out trying to date, and I met a mortician one time. Next thing you know, a couple days later on TikTok, they're showing me this is where you can buy an airbrush casket. I don't need to know that. Like, that's not what I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But I also didn't know that was a thing, right? I did not know that was a commerce output. Like, I just didn't know, right? And so, thanks. I'm gonna pass. Like, we're gonna not do that. But it has made entrepreneurship so much more accessible. Certainly, there are a lot of risks that come with that. Things like the TikTok ban, which has had people like melting down for a couple of months, and I'm sure that the meltdowns will continue despite the fact that it's back. But I see also how I follow a number of I got 2 accounts, so don't come look for me. But but I also have an account that just kind of follows a lot of things in vet med and kind of thinking about the ways in which vet med is moving into that space, right? Which is really fascinating because it is, a profession that is like, well, of course you need to see the animal, boom, right here. You need to be able to touch it. You need to be able to see it and all of those types of things. And we also know that the profession continues to have lengthy debates about telemedicine and all of these different kinds of things. But it seems like the economy is moving faster than the profession. So any thoughts on, what are you seeing when we look more specifically at vet med?
Yeah, I see a couple different things. One is this idea of business models are changing, but very slowly in vet med. And I've talked to probably close to 600 or 700 vet students in the last year. And I keep telling them, I said, think about it differently. And I just see this kind of entrenched mindset around, well, I have to have a practice. It has to be in person. It has to be a physical building. And all of those things really just changed with what people want, how people want access to care, how people want access to their job as a veterinarian. I mean, we saw so many more relief vets. It was like people should have been building relief vet business, right? There's no startup to that. You go into a clinic, you work for that clinic however many days a week you want, go to the one right down the road and do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Be a consultant. We saw poultry medicine completely change over the last 20, 30 years, where it's about population medicine. It's not really about being a chicken mechanic, as some people put it. It's really about thinking about these problems differently. And I just still see this kind of slow movement to embracing the fact that all this information is out there, that a pet owner is going to look up all of this stuff before they even walk into your office. How do you work with them? How do you combat that? How do you be the expert, but also be sensitive to all those things? It takes different business models. It takes different consumer or customer success models and client education. There are options to be more than just a veterinarian putting a needle in a dog, right? Giving them a rabies shot. It's really about thinking about it differently, being that veterinarian that is all about client education, right?
Yeah.
And thinking just business models that are different. And I'd love to see that change a little bit more, but I know there's a lot of stress that comes with that. We're not raising, actually, we're raising kids, right? We're raising veterinarians to, be veterinarians and not thinking about business and those types of things, which obviously is my passion about helping people think differently about all of it.
Yeah. I mean, which, pushes it back into education and how much, again, I could go on a serious soapbox about how education writ large kind of bashes creativity, but like, right. But I do think that is an issue in the sense that, no, this is the way we've done it. It's worked this way for many years. Hey, we advanced. We don't use a wagon anymore. Like, it's just kind of, but I've worked in other health professions and we talk about market demands, and I'm like, well, there's things that I see on the horizon as a non-veterinarian who's worked in other health professions that, like, it is coming and you can fight it, but the market actually dictates a lot of this, right? What does the consumer and the customer want and need, and how do they expect it to be delivered to them? Right? Like, it's crazy because you were talking about the gig economy, Clint, and I was like, before COVID, there were only, like, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 cities in North America, at least in the US, that you could get something delivered 24/7 any day of the week, right? New York, maybe Chicago, San Fran, maybe LA. Like, and then COVID happened. and we are getting everything delivered.
Yeah. Well, it's even funny. I ordered mulch from Home Depot the other day, and it was like same day delivery. And it's somebody who's delivers as a third party, right? As an individual for Home Depot. And I was like, oh, I got it. Great. This was awesome. Same day, like 3 hours later, could spread the mulch on a warm day. It was fine.
Yeah.
Thinking about that in vet med, obviously those things aren't going to translate perfectly.
Sure.
But just trying to change the way we think about those problems. Yeah. I want to make one point on the education side. I literally had a conversation with my mom, who's a retired educator, 2 days ago, that it was just like, for me, it was just being in a household, particularly that encouraged tinkering and thinking about a problem and not just being told an answer or told that there is a right and wrong answer. It was figure it out, like have some time and just explore. And that's what I want education to be for everybody. I know it can't be. I know that you got to know those diseases. You got to be able to pick out what's going on with that animal, but just exploring everything that life has to offer and what a profession has to offer requires a lot of that.
Yeah, it's essential. And I think that when we even talk about, medical breakthroughs, those are the folks that are open to that kind of creativity. They have these questions and they're going to go spend 17 years looking at these questions, much like yourself or myself. And then you have these moments of breakthrough. But yeah, we, even with little kids, at some point we're like, yeah, you're too old to do imaginary play anymore, right? And those kinds of things. And so when we think about kind of the future of education models, when we think about the future of practice models, and it's like, oh, you can't do it that way because, and I'm like, or you can, to your point, even when we were talking about, rural communities, like let's reframe that to more positive things, like, or you can do it and this is what it might look like,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's sort of getting back to this place that, especially in economics, when we, even in the theoretical sections of economics, when we work through these problems on businesses, there is a place where you have to realize businesses have to fail in order to figure out what is going to work for the future. How do those things change? There's businesses that were ahead of their times. I mean, Mac was, right? They had to basically reinvent themselves, go underground, and then come back out and be everything that they were, Mac and Apple in particular. And so it's sort of this letting creativity be sparked, letting people fail, and finding new ways to succeed, because that has truly been what drives the economy. That's what drives business. That's what drives happiness in a lot of places.
Yeah. Freedom to fail. So on that, we talked a little bit about kind of some of the trends and some of the things that might be barriers to, broadening opportunities within the profession, right? Kind of working differently, what practices might look like, even what might education look like. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on, what some of these things mean specifically around access to care and even access to education, right? And so we know that there's an access to care issue. Guess what? It mirrors the access to care, to human health care.
Right.
Those things are actually pretty tied together. If you're not going to have one, the likelihood of you having and being able to afford the other is kind of goes down as well. But, what are some of those things that you look for, even as markers that, hey, this might mean that folks can have better access or point to opportunities for better access to veterinary care, healthcare, education, all of those things that we need to kind of move on up that Maslow.
That a lot of these trends, especially around the gig economy, there's a lot of, in certain sections of the gig economy, the feet pictures section, there's some negative stigma around it.
Right.
But all of these trends, all these opportunities really open up individual economic freedom, right? It's saying, hey, I don't need a bunch of capital. I can go and work on creating stickers like I did, or selling feet pictures, or whatever it might be, being a TikTok superstar. It's creating more financial freedom in order to then say, hey, I can go to college. I can go to vet school. I'm rewatching Grey's Anatomy if you really want to know part of my personality there. But it was funny because in those early seasons, one of the characters, she was a model. There's a lot of negative stigma about her taking pictures in her undergarments. But she paid for med school in this fictional world, right?
Feet pics.
Yeah. Hey, if it gets you there, if it creates that economic freedom, it's really going to change access to care for pet owners, right? We know financial access to care is one of the biggest barriers. Can they afford it? And not even physical access to care, which is a whole nother problem, but financial access to care matters. If it helps them keep a pet in the household, why does it matter?
Yeah.
It's about creating these systems that, again, allow for this freedom of entrepreneurship, freedom to kind of create a career, a job, whatever it might be, to really be successful in their own right and move up and be able to spend that money on that pet. We know that it's really about disposable income. I got more disposable income. My dog can go with me on that private jet, right?
Yes. Yes, I remember seeing that ad for the pet private jet, and my dog is very spoiled, but he will never.
I mean, mine's almost going to be 13 this year, and he's getting older, so we try not to travel as much together.
Right. But yeah, that accessibility and kind of financial freedom and what does that lean into, right? As somebody, I also just got my PSLF. Woo 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 woo. I got my loans forgiven for my graduate degrees, and that was a big chunk of money.
Yeah.
Every month. And, my financial planner was like, great. Now we're going to transition that money right on over into these investments. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let me enjoy it for a few months. also there's some things I need and want to do with these funds, but also like I just need this taste of freedom from that huge bill every month.
Yeah.
And yes, I am definitely, putting money back in the economy. But it is interesting to kind of think about, that these are the ways in which students are creating access to education, right? How they're supplementing their student loans, how they're, managing. I mean, and for some communities, they're also having, I know quite a number of students from very low income backgrounds who are living below a standard of modesty, I would say, because they've got to send some of that loan money to support a family back home,
Yeah.
and not a family that they birthed, the family that birthed them.
Right.
You know, yeah, it's
And
complicated.
yeah, I drank with somebody a few weeks ago, and that was everything we talked about. It's way more complicated for each individual than anybody could ever understand, whether that's about finances, about personal life, about education, whatever it might be. And to really just embrace that and say, there's creating more ways to create economic freedom as an individual, all for it. And let's continue to develop that. And diversity helps with doing that because we think about those problems differently. And that's really what we should be encouraging within the profession as a society, but really just trying to continue to get vet med to move into this way to think about how do we create more freedom? How do we create systems that work for everybody, especially when most of the profession now is female presenting, and how does that look? And how do we create for those that want a family? How do we help support that, especially in
Right.
rural spaces? So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's just in this space now that I'm like, I want to create economic freedom. You got to think differently. We need the diversity of thought for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we've moved on from, bashing the millennials. Not totally moved on, but we
Not
moved on
totally.
from bashing the millennials, and now we're starting to, kind of bash the Gen Zs, right? And I'm a parent to the Gen Zs, and one, again, when we think about how we think about decision making, I told folks this a couple of times when they asked me like, these young people, they don't want to work hard. No, they want to work differently.
Yeah.
They, they don't mind working hard, but their idea of working hard is not, 80 hours a week. Like that's not a value set, right? That they have. And they're like, ugh. And I'm like, where do they come from? Why are they like this? And I'm like, okay, Gen X, can we look at ourselves for a moment? We need to go to therapy as a collective generation because it's our fault. If you want to say it's a fault, which I don't
Yeah.
think it's a fault in my professional life, because again, I live with a Gen Z and I'm like, what the hell? But it's a difference of values in terms of not just leisure, but freedom.
Yeah.
It's about freedom. They're willing to do the work, but it's a different set of terms that none of us were ever given.
Right. I mean, there was one way to do a career, and
Right.
that was what you did. Even for me, which I'm on the younger side of millennials, it still felt like, well, I've switched jobs a number of times. I still have people going, oh, well, that was a bad move. And I'm like, I make more money. I work with people that I enjoy working with, and I get to work on problems that I find interesting, but also make an impact.
Yeah.
Totally different mindset. The last thing I was thinking about, also within this case, I saw a trend where millennials and Gen Zs are now doing basically retirement sabbaticals in their 30s and 40s, where they're just like, yeah, I'm going to quit working for 2 years and I'm going to spend the money I've saved to go have those experiences, have that freedom. And then I'll go back to working. They're like, I don't need to
Right.
save all of this till I'm 65.
Right.
I can do all of that now when I'm healthy, when when my
Right.
knees are fine.
Right. Yeah. Before hip replacement.
Yeah.
Which, and we, yeah. And so this is also where those generational shifts come in. And it's fascinating to me because these generational kerfluffles, which are not new, they happen with every generation, every single one. The boomers are still looking at Xers like, what the heck are you guys doing? And we're like, leave us alone. We're listening to Tupac, leave us alone. We're still listening to Tupac and Nirvana, leave us alone. Like, right? But these are, if we actually can create some space for their leadership, their partnered leadership in the profession, we will actually see some of the solutions that we're looking for, right? Rather than kind of beating it out of them, like, no, this is the way that it is. When they actually are like, if you do this, that, and the other, it can look really, really different. And I don't have to be here on Saturday night.
Yeah. Well, and it's this sort of what I think that often gets overlooked and is really an asset of the older generations in this case of, especially in vet med, is that what you're going to be thinking about, am I covering my costs? Can I make that operate? They have the business experience in a traditional model that are still important things to think about in these newer systems, but they can go, okay, they can ask those tougher questions, but they could do it more from a supportive standpoint of like, well, have you thought about like, how are you going to cover those costs? How are you going to make that work in a way that says, I love the idea. How do I help make that happen? And ask those tougher questions. And then really just help them kind of be creative and solve these problems.
Yeah.
Because I find I've worked with a number of small businesses getting them developed. That was a big part of my academic career. And it's just like, hey, have you thought about the fact that you need to make money at least to break even so you can keep doing what you love doing?
Yeah. Yeah. You need to make money.
Yeah. And that's not to be saying as like, you need to make all this massive amount of profit. It's just saying that, hey, you're really passionate about it. I'm going to help you keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's back to behavioral economics. It's called satisficing.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much, Clint. So one last question as we wrap up. So you said that you follow a number of cooking and baking influencers. What do you cook and bake, friends?
Well, this week, everybody got into sourdough baking during COVID. I was doing it before COVID, just want to make that clear. But I have really embraced a lot of different breads. I made baguettes this week. I have a nice loaf of sourdough, but I make all kinds of bread. I love watching and learning more about it. And then I also just love cooking in general. I finally putting all of my recipes from multiple cookbooks, online, things I've come up with, all writing down and typing it up for a cookbook. So hopefully that'll be my 2025 goal.
See, like diversifying income streams.
Exactly.
I love it. I mean, I like cooking. I love bread baking as well. I didn't do as much, and I'm definitely not far along on I've dabbled with sourdough, but it's just easier for me to buy it. So I'm not, I've raised one child. I don't need to do.
I only got a dog. We're good.
But there are some really great no need kind of wetty dough kind of stuff that you can also allow the dough to mature, that gives it a little little soury kind of sourdough kind of feel. So I like those a lot.
Yeah, I maintain my sourdough culture, but my main bread recipe for sourdough is actually a no knead. So
yeah,
I got you covered.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you. Always really great information, and I look forward to chatting with you again sometime soon.
Thanks.
To kind of
Thanks for having
unpack
me.
all the things that are happening in the world economically. So thanks a bunch.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and looking forward to coming back another time when things hopefully settle down a bit.
Yes, things settle down a bit. So, all right. Well, it's been another episode of AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. Be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast app. You can also, of course, watch current and old episodes. You can watch the whole thing with video on our YouTube channel. And that, of course, is AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. Thanks so much for listening and viewing, and we'll see you next time.